They say wolves can smell fear. I used to smell everything, until the world went silent. The car door clicked shut behind me, and a ribbon of dry mountain air lifted the hair at my temples. Somewhere below the switchback road, a river talked to itself against stone. The neutral hotel, glass and steel and money, balanced on the cliff as if the architects had dared gravity to argue. In the lobby, a chandelier scattered midnight into constellations on the marble floor. The barista's grinder sang. People passing carried paper cups that said Highland House in gold leaf. I knew the coffee was good because everyone said so. I knew the mountain pines were sharp and clean because the concierge insisted the hotel had been placed for that exact breeze. I knew the lobby had been misted with something meant to whisper wealth because the manager told me, too breathlessly, to enjoy the signature scent. For me, the air was a perfect blank. No bitter, no sweet, no smoke, no storm. Once upon a time, I tracked lives by the stories their bodies told. Now I listened for cues in voices, watched the tremor in a hand, counted the beats between a blink and the next. I live in silence where others hear symphonies, I wrote once, after the accident. The doctors called it anosmia. I called it a truce between me and my own biology. Mr. Quinn? A young staffer in a blazer that cost what rent used to cost, before treaties and teeth fell into step with me. Conference suite is ready. Both delegations are on property. Security has been, heightened, because wolves are famously chill about old grudges, I said. Her smile flickered. I'm told you're the best. They tell a lot of stories about me, I said, and adjusted the tie I wore as armor. Most of them are more flattering than true. But I am punctual. The corridor was a glass artery. On one side, winter bit the lake into steel. On the other, a wall of old photographs, smiling couples, a ribbon cutting with the governor, a black and white shot of men in suits pretending to be surprised by cake. The conference suite sat at the end, tall doors, discreet cameras, a technician lifting his eyes to give me the non-verbal, "We're good." Inside, the table was long enough to land an apology on. Place cards waited. Carafes sweated. Someone had staged bowls of fruit like still lifes. Grapes, pears, the architecture of abundance. The Red Claws came in first, red ties and colder eyes. The Halens followed, gray suits like fog, expressions like granite. Old blood had run between these two families before I was born. No one could remember the original insult, though both sides could recite its fallout. Trade routes, territorial lines, a nephew who went missing, and a daughter who came back bruised. That's the thing about grudges, they outlive their reasons. Gentlemen, I said, because both delegations had decided to pretend there were no women in their ranks today. We have 48 hours to decide if your grandchildren will inherit a map or a minefield. I'd like to leave with a map. Your metaphors are cute, said a Red Claw with a scar that tried to smile when he didn't. But treat this with the seriousness it deserves. Here's how I'm treating it, I said, and laid out the agenda. 7 points, each one a coal I planned to carry across without blistering. There are moments in mediation when tone matters more than position. I kept mine steady, neither soft nor sharp. I let silence do some of the heavy lifting. I watched the way throats moved when people swallowed, how hands sought, pockets, whether chins rose in defiance or drooped into acquiescence. Halfway through my opening remarks, the air shifted. It wasn't scent. I would have missed it, even if the world hadn't switched itself off. It was pressure, like the room had inhaled and refused to exhale. A ripple went through the Red Claws. The Halens went taut. He entered without announcement, as if architecture was just another obstacle he didn't intend to acknowledge. Tall, broad shoulders beneath a dark coat that absorbed the light. A charcoal scarf at his throat, gloves he didn't remove. His hair was a dark, practical cut. His eyes were the unkind green of river water in shadow. Even from across the table, the feeling of him was weather. Asher Hale, someone whispered, like naming a storm to keep it offshore. I knew him by reputation, the alpha who didn't smell pheromones so much as emotions, a specialist, and a cautionary tale. People said he'd walked out of 3 coronations because the joy was too loud. People said he knew when a lie started as a thought and turned into a breath. He didn't sit. He stood behind the Halen's chair like an unmoving tide. Eyes moved over the room, the way a scanner moves across a barcode. And then he looked at me, and the pressure dipped, subtle as a nod. "Mr. Quinn," said a Halen, whose cufflinks were the economy of a small town. "This is a courtesy." "The courtesy would have been telling me your courtesy was coming," I said mildly. "But since he's here, Mr. Hale is welcome to observe. Our rules still stand, no interruptions. We speak one at a time. If anyone throws a chair, I will make them sit in it." A few men smiled. Most didn't. Asher's mouth didn't move at all. We began. Trade routes, the winter hunting corridor, patrol overlaps. Old compromises were carried out from storage and examined under brighter light. I asked questions I already knew the answers to. People lied as a way of negotiating with themselves. The Red Claw's leader, Victor, scar, tie like a wound, leaned forward as if proximity could be persuasion. The Halens countered with numbers that did not add up, but looked impressive marching across paper. Every time someone's temper spiked, Asher went rigid, as if bracing against a wind only he could feel. His gloved hand tightened, loosened. Twice, he closed his eyes like he was trying to locate the calm in a room that had none. The scarf at his throat was practical, yes, but also a little tragic, as if the world demanded he muffle himself to survive it. "Mr. Quinn, you are avoiding the issue," Victor said, voice pleasant as steel. "The Northern Pass is ours by ancestral claim. Ancestral claims are the bedtime stories we tell ourselves to fall asleep on stolen land," I said. "If we want to talk about now, we'll talk about now." Victor's smile thinned. A Halen barked a laugh he pretended not to. Under the table, shoes shifted. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled past. Ice clinked. I watched Asher. The tendons in his neck made small declarations. He was drowning in a flood of invisible ink. We called a 10-minute recess before someone decided to perform a demonstration of masculinity involving furniture. Out in the corridor, glass on one side, mountain on the other, light carved the air into pale slabs. I leaned on the rail, below. The lake wore a coat of pewter and disdain. Asher joined me. Not quite close. Not quite distant. The scarf sat high under his jaw. He was not breathing like a man at rest. "If you're going to faint," I said, "do it after the treaty's signed." His glance was sideways, like he was checking to see whether I'd break if he pushed. "How considerate of you." "I'm told," I said, "that I'm a delight." "What you are," he said quietly, "is quiet." I looked at him. "That's a new insult." "It isn't," he said. "It's survival." He flexed his gloved hand, a small betrayal of discomfort. "They're loud, all of them. Anger, contempt, fear, it's like cheap perfume spilled in a small room." "Lucky me," I said. "I don't smell a thing." He studied me with a concentration that would have been rude on anyone else. "Not nothing," he said. "Quiet. Which is different." The distinction cut more than it should have. After the accident, well-meaning people fed me synonyms: neutral, blank, empty. Quiet sounded like a choice. "Then we should go make some noise," I said, pushing off the rail. "Preferably the useful kind." We returned to the table. If I'm a blade when I'm best, that afternoon I sharpened. We mapped the pass with colored pens, like children rediscovering crayons. We traded concessions like cards, keeping the aces for later. I asked the Red Claws to define ancestral in terms that would survive a court. I asked the Halens to explain why their patrols had strayed, and why the word accident insulted everyone's intelligence. At one point, Victor leaned in. "Smile too much tooth. You love this, don't you?" "What, power?" I asked. "Words?" Control, he said. Control is just the name we give to fear when we put it in a suit, I said. If you want peace, you have to let something go. From the corner, the Halen cufflinks man grunted approval. Asher's head tilted. My skin knew the focus of it, even if my nose never would. By late evening, the fruit bowls had collapsed from still life into still death. We had a sketch of a ceasefire, conditional and ugly, which is to say, real. The sun quit the mountains without a fight, and let the moon hang its pale coin over the lake. The chandelier shifted its constellation. Good work, I said finally, closing my notebook. We'll finalize language in the morning. In the meantime, try to enjoy the amenities. I'm told the spa is excellent, the restaurant oversalts, and the towels believe in themselves. Chairs scraped. Men pretended not to be exhausted. Security relaxed by millimeters. I gathered my pen, the totem I'd carried through more fragile rooms than this one. He didn't move. Asher. He waited, patient as weather, when the last suit had evacuated, when only the technician and his cables remained, and even he found a reason to leave. Asher stepped closer. Not invasive, not timid, like a man approaching a door he wasn't sure would open. He stopped a breath away. The scarf smelled like nothing to me. His eyes were up close, the color of a forest seen from the wrong side of a storm. He inhaled. I watched his face out of habit, out of self-defense, out of the curiosity that had kept me alive. People's expressions when they smelled me used to be a chorus. Comfort, heat, appetite, anger. I'd learned to choreograph to it until the accident made every dance a different kind of silence. Asher didn't flinch. He didn't brace. The smallest exhale left him like a relieved laugh that hadn't learned its name. Some muscle unclenched at the hinge of his jaw. You, he said, and stopped. He tried again, the words cautious, like stepping stones across a stream. You don't reek. That's because I don't smell at all, I said, the joke old enough to drink, but it landed differently here, with him. Less defense. More invitation. His gaze held mine, steady, testing, not unkind. The room hummed. Outside, the lake shifted its metal jacket. The moon traded places with a cloud. In the glass, we were two figures at the end of a long table, built alike for endurance and the wrong kind of storms. Good, he said finally, as if a verdict. Then maybe we can work. The word lodged under my ribs. Work. Sure, that was the story I knew how to live in. But I heard the other thing he didn't say. Breathe. Tomorrow, I said. 9, sharp. He nodded, and for the first time that day, the pressure in the room didn't fight me. Asher turned, the coat swallowing motion, the scarf dark against his throat. At the door, he glanced back as if to confirm I was still there. I raised my pen in a salute. He left. I stood in the quiet I carried with me, the chandelier throwing constellations over a table no one was, yelling across anymore, and let the silence touch my skin like rain that hadn't yet decided to fall. Morning came painted in diluted gold across the mountains. The glass dome above the conference suite caught every flicker of light, turning the air itself into something reflective and fragile. It looked beautiful. It felt like a migraine waiting to happen. Asher was already there when I arrived, early, sharp, a silhouette against the window. His coat was gone today, the scarf folded on the table, and his sleeves were rolled to the elbows, as if the weight of formality had become too heavy to carry. His posture said, alert. His jaw said pain. By the time both delegations filed in, the temperature of the room had changed. It wasn't the weather, it was him. Every new wave of anger or arrogance that rolled off the participants hit Asher like a physical force. I saw it in the way his eyes flinched, in the tiny flecks of his fingers, as if bracing against an invisible wind. Victor from the Red Claws was doing his usual theater, leaning too close, raising his voice just a fraction too much. The Halens were smugly amused. Asher, one of them hissed under his breath. You all right? The Alpha didn't answer, His jaw locked, and I could almost hear his pulse grinding. I tried to focus on the agenda, but it was like watching someone drown beside you while you're supposed to discuss maritime law. Finally, I set down my pen. "Gentlemen," I said. 5-minute recess. "But Victor began. 5 minutes. I stood, crossed the room, and caught Asher's sleeve. He didn't resist, just followed me out into the corridor, his steps a little uneven. The hallway was empty. Sunlight fractured through the glass like 100 tiny explosions. He leaned a shoulder against the wall, eyes shut. "If you're going to faint," I said, "do it after the treaty's signed." He cracked one eye open. "How considerate of you. I'm told it's my best quality." A breath escaped him, half a laugh, half an exhale of relief. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from fighting something nobody else can see. "Do you want water? Coffee?" I asked. Noise-canceling headphones and an exorcism. I tilted my head. "Bad morning?" "They're loud," he said, rubbing his temples. "Not their voices, their feelings. It's everything. Fear, greed, self-righteousness. It's like standing in a perfume factory on fire. So you smell emotions." "Not smell," he said quickly. "It's more like I taste them in the air, hear them humming." Everyone has their own frequency. You learn to build walls, but sometimes walls crack. I studied him. The way his pulse ticked under his skin, the faint tremor in his fingers, the tightness behind his eyes. And with me? He looked up. His gaze was clearer now, almost curious. "With you, there's only quiet." The words shouldn't have meant anything, but they did. Quiet. Not blank. Not empty. Just peace. "Well," I said, clearing my throat, "you're welcome for the complimentary silence. We charge extra for that." That got a real smile out of him. Quick, reluctant, but real. He straightened. "Let's finish this before someone else starts leaking insecurity all over the carpet." We went back inside. The delegations barely noticed our absence. They were too busy pretending not to hate each other. I resumed my chair at the head of the table. Asher settled back behind the Halens, and we started again. Something had shifted. He was still alert, but steadier, like he'd found a rhythm to breathe with. I used my words like thread, sewing the edges of their egos together. Asher's presence was the needle, sharp enough to pierce, steady enough to guide. When Victor tried to disguise a lie about border patrols, Asher's eyes flicked up to me, one subtle shake of the head. I pivoted immediately. "So what you're really saying," I cut in, "is that your men acted independently, which means your leadership either lost control or encouraged it. Which is it, Victor?" The room stilled. A few seconds of silence later, Victor muttered something about miscommunication. Asher's lip twitched. I almost smiled. We worked like that for hours. I spoke. He felt. I read the politics. He read the pulse. It was bizarrely efficient, like we'd been paired by an algorithm that valued irony. When the afternoon bled into evening, sunlight poured red through the dome. Everyone looked softer in that light, like war had been briefly postponed for aesthetic reasons. "We make a good team," I murmured, when the Halens agreed to a provisional clause. "Don't say that," Asher replied under his breath. "People will start shipping us." I coughed to hide a laugh. "You wish." He leaned just enough for his voice to drop lower. "Do I?" I pretended to be fascinated by a chart. "Focus. Hale." His chuckle was quiet, genuine, and for a moment, the tension in the room eased. By the time the last signatures dried on the provisional treaty, everyone looked 10 years older. We'd done it. Barely temporarily, but it held. Chairs scraped, papers shuffled, the smell of ink and success mingled in the air. Metaphorically for me, literally for them. I shook hands, said the right words, let congratulations roll over me like static. When the room emptied and dusk washed the mountains in rose and violet, Asher lingered again. He moved to stand beside me by the panoramic glass wall. Outside, the sun fell into the lake, scattering gold across steel. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "You don't just silence me, Jeremy," he said finally, voice low. "You make me breathe." The words slid through the quiet, like a confession disguised as observation. I should have said something witty, kept the banter alive, but for once I didn't. My throat closed around all the things I could have said, and none felt safe enough. He didn't wait for a response. He just nodded, as if he'd confirmed a theory, and turned away. When he was gone, I found myself watching his reflection fade in the glass. His outline, melting into the dark outside, the last echo of his voice still inside my chest. Breathing. Right, I remembered how to do that. Peace always has a sound. Paper on wood. Pens clicking. The quiet applause of men congratulating themselves on being civilized. That afternoon, it was the shallow hush of signatures drying, the hollow scrape of chairs, the hum of a printer finalizing language that had cost us days and a few years off my life. "As if the world will listen just because ink did," I murmured, initialing one last page. Across the table, Asher was lighter, not smiling. That seemed like a ritual he'd forgotten, but looser at the hinges. His coat was over the back of a chair. The scarf lay folded in strict obedience. His shoulders sat an inch lower than they had all morning, as if his body had been waiting years to put something down. "We did enough," he said. For now is where the living happens," I said, and he gave me a look like maybe he could get used to that line. The hotel under the glass dome was bathed in late light, red and fond. Victor from the Red Claws shook my hand with a mouth that did its best impression of good faith. The Halens pretended they'd always meant to be reasonable. A waiter entered with champagne, towels folded like swans, and the slightly stunned face of a person about to witness an honest-to-God miracle. Wolves not being wolves. I didn't smell the citrus in the flutes. I didn't smell the ozone that comes before catastrophe. But I felt something shiver through the room, like a string drawn too tight. Asher's head snapped up. His eyes went feral and far away at once. "Get down," he said. The first blast was a swallowed sun. The glass dome above us coughed shards, light bent wrong, and the air punched my chest from the inside. Sound blanked, then screamed back in jagged pieces. Metal shrieking, a fire alarm stuttering. Someone praying in a language that had too many consonants to be safe right now. The table leaped, and then became debris. The chandelier constellations broke into knives. I hit the floor with a memory I hadn't invited. The way sirens sound when you're lying on a street after a car decides to rearrange your life. A rush of bodies. Heat gusting. My ears rang high and hard. Through the ringing, Asher's breath. Not the rhythm I'd learned yesterday. Not the careful, measured draw he used to look civilized. This was open and violent. An animal pushed to the edge of a cliff. "Blood," he said, voice raw and small. "It burns." He wasn't looking at the fire slithering across the carpet or the ceiling panel blinking itself. To death, he was looking at nothing or everything, like the air itself was screaming at him. His hands were braced on the floor, but he swayed, throat working, pupils blown wide. Someone was shouting orders. Security, I think. Another blast, smaller. A tantrum compared to the first. Sprinklers coughed and failed. Wet ash drifted like unseasonal snow. Victor's tie was a red slash in smoke. The Halens moved as a unit, and then lost each other. I crawled, lungs burning with air that tasted like powdered concrete and regret. I found Asher by touch, coat sleeve, wrist, the fine trembling of a muscle that didn't know the word stop. Asher. I slid my shoulder under his and levered up. "We have to move." He flinched, like I'd thrown him. "There." He gagged on a sensation my body would never be able to translate. Fear. Pain. "It's too loud." "If you're going to faint," I said, "because humor is a bridge over the boiling parts, do it after the treaty's signed." The sound that broke out of him could have been a laugh in a less apocalyptic room. He grabbed for my forearm. We got our legs under us. Something in my right knee complained like an old man, and then shut up when I promised an apology later. We staggered through a corridor that had been glass, and now was a path of glittering knives. I pulled him when he faltered, let him pull me when my balance went. Behind us, a secondary explosion thumped the air. The suite we'd made peace in exhaled smoke and paperwork. Left, I said, because the emergency signs still knew their jobs. Stairs. We moved. Smoke tried to learn my name. My eyes watered in a way that had nothing to do with smell. Footsteps pounded above and below, voices colliding. What about the others? Asher said, straining toward the cacophony of human panic. They'll follow protocol, I said. Right now, I am protocol. Move. On the landing, a man in a suit staggered toward us, face slick with blood, mouth making shapes around words that wouldn't form. Asher went rigid again. Breath punched out of him as if the man's terror had become a physical object between us. Hey, I said to the man, taking his elbow. Down 2 flights, exit on the east, medics will be there. My wife, he choked. She's ahead of you. I lied clean and smooth. She yelled at me to tell you to hurry. It was a decent lie. It worked. He stumbled down, Faith carrying him faster than his feet. We hit the service corridor. It was blessedly empty, blessedly boring. Gray walls, bad art, the humming heart of a hotel's hidden veins. Asher's breathing hitched, steadied, hitched. Look at me, I said, pinning him with the one thing I had left. My voice. What's in here? He blinked hard, focused. You. Silence. Then stay here with me. We moved again, out a side door into cold that slapped. The mountain had decided to wear winter early. The air cut my lungs into tidy pieces. The lake glared. Sirens tried to out-sing the mountains and failed. We didn't head down to the main parking loop, where security and chaos were making a new family. We went up, away from asphalt and authority, toward the service road that clung to the ridge like an afterthought. The path kinked into the trees. Snow from last week's tantrum clung to the shadows. Someone's picnic table lay upside down like a fallen animal. How's your romantic weekend going? I said, because my mouth didn't know when to stop. Spa, champagne, wholly avoidable homicide? You're annoying, he said, voice scraped raw. You're heavy, I said, grinning at the trees that didn't deserve it. At least I'm alive. See? Teamwork. We didn't stop until the hotel noise became a rumor the mountain wasn't interested in. My knee shook. My shoulder was going to write me a complaint. Asher's weight settled into his own frame, but the shudder in him came and went like a ghost wind. Through the trees, the skeleton of an old hillside house sulked. A low stone base, roof sagging like it believed in gravity, one wall missing so the rooms were a dollhouse cut open for the sky. The door was a suggestion. The porch had retired in place. Charming, I said. Open plan. We ducked inside. It smelled like dust and mice and the past, or so I told myself by logic, because I had none of the facts. The floor complained under our weight. A fireplace gaped like a toothless mouth. There were footprints in the dust. Fresh, small. Asher? I said softly. We weren't alone. The sound reached us before the sight, a soft, stubborn argument in whispers. We followed it to a back room where a mattress lay on the floor like a defeated boat. 2 shapes huddled there, making themselves smaller, a boy and a girl, both teenagers, both too thin. The boy sprang up first, putting himself between us and the girl with a kind of ridiculous bravery that would have been funny if the day hadn't been what it was. He was all elbows and intentions, dark hair sticking up, eyes bright with the energy that survives bad things. Human, beta, if I had to guess by the precise absence of any tilt in the air. Back off, he said, voice cracking on the off. We didn't steal anything. Congratulations, I said. That puts you ahead of half the people I know. The girl stayed crouched, gaze sharp and guarded. Omega. The angle of her chin, the tension in her shoulders, the way she tracked Asher like he was a wildfire she refused to turn her back on. Her hair was braided tight, her hands were balled defensively without shaking. Not weak. Just calculating. We heard the blasts, the boy said. We came up here yesterday. It was empty then. Are you from the hotel? Sort of, I said. More like we escaped it in a hurry. I'm Jeremy, this is Asher. The girl's eyes didn't leave Asher's face. You're in pain, he swallowed. Yes. Because of us? Because of everyone, he said, and somehow made it sound like an apology. The boy brushed his hands on his jeans and stuck one out with the kind of courage that gets you killed or crowned. We shook. His palm was cold and damp and determined. The girl stood slowly, chin lifting. Eli. Eli, I repeated, the name settling like a small weight in the air. Can we share your abandoned mansion for the night? Tom flapped a hand at the ruins, like a landlord with questionable standards. Be my guests. We need to stay off the roads, I said. There'll be checkpoints. Whoever did that downstairs won't be thrilled we left before the encore. Eli's gaze cut to the window, to the ribbon of road barely visible through trees. They'll come up here too. Yes, I said, and when they do, we'll not be here. Asher had moved to a section of wall that had the dignity to remain upright. He slid down it until he sat, knees up, gloved hands braced on them. He didn't close his eyes, but he looked like a man who would appreciate the audition. Is he okay? Tom whispered, as if sound could bruise. He's carrying more than his share, I said. Give him a minute. We set about the practicalities. Tom found a metal kettle that had retired but might be convinced to work again. I turned my jacket into a pillow that would offend anyone with a spine and offered it to Eli. She stared at it like I'd handed her a relic, then took it without comment. You two alone? I asked, because the room was too small for Hope and also couldn't hold the alternative. Tom's mouth twisted. We were with others. After the floods... He stopped, looked at Eli. It's been a while. Eli watched me like she waited for a test. We don't need charity. Good, I said lightly. We don't have any. Just bad jokes and a violent desire to survive. A sound like relief almost happened in Tom's chest. He crouched by the cold fireplace and made a ceremony of arranging sticks we didn't have into fire we couldn't risk. Dusk crept in with cold fingers. The ruined house sounded bigger in the wind. Somewhere far below, sirens still tried to convince the valley to be shocked. I crossed to Asher and slid down the wall beside him, close enough that our shoulders almost considered it. His hands were shaking now, small tremors, as if the day had settled in his bones and started to rattle the cupboards. Close your eyes, I said. I need to... His throat worked. There's too much of everything. Close your eyes, I repeated, softer. Focus on my voice. There's nothing to smell here. He huffed a breath that tried to be a laugh and failed honorably. His eyes shut. A beat. Another. His shoulders didn't drop so much as remember that it was an option. I matched my breathing to something slow, something boring, something like a metronome built out of stubbornness. Good, I said. Stay with me, in and out. The only thing in here is quiet. Quiet, he echoed. The word rough and reverent. Tom, across the room, mimed exaggerated silent breathing to Eli, who rolled. Her eyes, and nevertheless did it too, because survival is contagious. The house breathed. The mountain breathed. We did too. The world didn't end, which felt like a personal favor. At some point, the tremor in Asher's hands eased, the line of his jaw unclenched. The place between his eyebrows, the one that had forgotten any life without tension, smoothed a fraction. His head tipped, just barely, toward my shoulder, as if gravity and choice had negotiated a treaty of their own. His mouth moved. Almost words. Then he slept. I stayed where I was. A pillar, a metronome, a bad pillow with a pen in the pocket. Eli sat with her back to the opposite wall, wide awake and watchful, the kind of stillness that isn't rest and isn't surrender. Tom curled like a comma on the far side of the mattress and started snoring immediately because youth is rude like that. Outside, the wind told the trees an old story about winters and endurance. Inside, Asher's breathing settled into a rhythm I recognized from the corridor yesterday. From the moment under the glass when he had told me I made him breathe. Now he did. And for the first time since the world got loud, I let the quiet I carried be big enough for 4. He looked less like an alpha and more like a man who had simply forgotten how to rest. I watched him for a long time that morning, the way sunlight found ledges of his cheek and carved small maps on the slope of his face. The ruins smelled of cold and dust and whatever mice leave as signatures. I couldn't smell the coffee Tom insisted on attempting, but I could see how the steam made the boy's hands look like they belonged to a magician pretending to be a barista. Asher lay on the ragged mattress like something newly unarmored, the rhythm of his chest slow enough to be notable. You collect habits when you live with silence. Mine is cataloging people's faces in the dawn, the way an eyelid twitches. When remembering an insult, the way a mouth softens on a name. Asher's face was loose this morning, an unusual verb for someone who'd spent his life tensing his skin like a shield. Maybe the world had given him a brief reprieve, and he'd accepted it without bargaining. Tom woke up at dawn the way sunlight wakes up puddles, loud, bright, and a little unconcerned about decorum. He yawned like a cartoon and stood, no warning, then peered at Asher with the delight of someone who'd discovered a secret passage. "Hey," he said, nudging Eli with an elbow. "Are you two together?" Eli raised an eyebrow with the precision of a veteran negotiator. "We're surviving," I said before Asher could, because my reflex for dryness is older than my empathy. "Don't ruin the vibe." Tom blinked, offended on principle. "Right. Survival. That's a vibe I can get behind." He went off to wrestle a kettle into submission. Eli stayed seated on the floor, knees hugged, braid loose now like a single line of thought. The three of them, Tom's effervescence, Eli's guarded steadiness, Asher's exhausted nobility, made a strange, combustible constellation. I found myself content to watch the way they orbited each other. Small differences in mass creating a kind of homeostasis. We scavenged what we could for breakfast. Tom managed coffee. By the application of very forceful optimism, Eli sliced a stale loaf into something less torturous. We ate in the small light that comes when a ruin still believes it has dignity. Outside, the mountain breathed cold. The hotel remained a rumor, a red thread of smoke on the horizon, and the valley had decided to stage its own cautionary tale in emergency crews and shouted commands. By midday, a slow, practical order took over. We rationed blankets, Eli set watches, Tom declared himself head of morale and enforced it like a benevolent dictator. Asher sat with his hands folded, sometimes watching the trees, sometimes staring at his own boots as if they could tell him a story worth listening to. That evening we built a fire in the ruined hearth and let the world shrink to its warm geography. Flames make language simpler. You can speak truth by the light of them and hope not to be judged. Tom tended the fire with the solemnity of someone officiating an ancient ritual, then sat, cross-legged like a sunburst, and started a running commentary on our status as fugitives. "So," he said, flicking an ember like it was a gavel, "we have 2 adults, 1 serious man, and 2 brilliant children. This is basically a weird family sitcom." Eli scowled. "We are not children." "Emotional children, then," Tom corrected. "Eli's the brooding teenager, Asher's the drama dad, Jeremy's the guy who smells like irony, and I am the sunshine that carries snacks." "You smell like burnt toast," Eli said, and Tom feigned outrage. I gave up pretending I didn't enjoy the ridiculousness. Laughter is medicine without side effects, and tonight we needed a full dose. Tom's jokes landed and bounced back like friendly pebbles across a pond we all pretended wasn't full of sharks. When the night folded in, Asher and I walked a little away from the hearth. The stars had that thin, hard quality mountains get when the atmosphere is too honest. Somewhere far below, sirens made their tired rounds. Up here, we could almost pretend the valley belonged to no one for the length of an exhale. "You didn't answer me earlier," he said, "about the way you stopped smelling. How did it happen?" I had told the story to people before, in pieces. There are versions you give to strangers, and versions you keep for people who sleep in your house. There are also the parts that get told only to yourself when the night is safe enough to practice. "It was a car," I said simply. "Not glamorous, not heroic. Rain, a slick road, a truck that decided it wanted a new alignment. I woke up in a hospital that smelled like antiseptic and regret. When the doctor told me the word anosmia, I thought it was temporary. I rescheduled my life around small miracles. Coffee, rain, my mother's perfume. Then one day the miracles stopped making sense. They were still miracles to other people. For me, they were instructions in another language." He listened like someone cataloging an artifact. "So there was no bargaining?" "Bargaining is for people who expect the universe to take offers," I said. I made lists. I tried to train my memory to read faces the way my nose had read rooms. I learned to be a detective of micro-expressions. "And that made you good at this," he said. "It made me useful. Dispassion is a tidy tool when you need to cut an argument down to facts." I shrugged. "But it's not the only way to be human." He inhaled, careful, habitual, and exhaled more noise than scent. "I would not trade that for silence," he said, voice low. "I think I would die." "You'd be dramatic about it," I said. He smiled then, a little. "An offering as practical as a bandage. There's that sarcasm. It's useful." We sat in companionable quiet for a while, watching the embers do the slow work of forgetting. The fire was a conversation that needed no words. Flame told us about endurance, about the economy of heat. Later, when the cold convinced Eli to pretend she wasn't watchful anymore, we shared the mattress. It started practical, sleep closer for warmth, but the reason grew on us like lichen. In the dark, we let the nonsense of performance drop away. I could have narrated the physics of proximity, but sometimes the simplest fact is the best. We were close, and it felt right. "Close your eyes," I murmured when the draft nudged the door frame. "I can't promise I'll sleep," Asher said. "Promise doesn't matter. Breathe with me." We practiced the absurd ritual of synchronizing inhalations in, 2, 3, out, 2, 3. The task was ridiculous and therefore effective. Focusing on a rhythm makes the mind less hospitable to panic. We breathed together like beginner musicians learning a duet, sometimes clumsy, sometimes startlingly good. Our chests rose and fell in the same pale rhythm. The absence of perfume, of biological commands, made the experience feel more honest, less choreographed by species. No pheromones tugged at the undersides of decisions. There was only warmth, the hum of shared effort, and the small, steady thing that happens when two people opt into calm. At one point, my hand found his. Not a grab, not a claim, more a test of whether touch still meant anything when nothing smelled of want. His fingers closed, not possessive, but grateful. There was no animal heat that demanded answers. There was simply the fact of contact. "I can't smell you," I said, voice no louder than a breeze through the rafters. "Then you're the first to know me for real," he replied. And there was something in his tone that made the words feel like a small revelation. We held that like a secret between two people who'd both been betrayed by the world in their own ways. I had thought absence would hollow me. Instead, it had taught me how to listen with other instruments. He had thought sensation would drown him. Instead, with someone nearby who didn't add to the noise, he found the space to breathe. Outside, a faint wind moved through the cracked eaves. Inside, The ruined house kept our small weather, our fire, our breath, our soft agreement to be present. The mountain kept guard with its indifferent dark. Tom snored, a surprisingly melodic punctuation at the room's edge. Eli's breathing was small and careful. Asher's slowed again, each inhale a ledger entry of trust. My hand in his was a bookmark in the story we'd begun to write together, not because the world ordained it, but because we both had enough scars to prefer honesty. I closed my eyes and counted our breaths until the rhythm became a thing that outlived panic. We were two flawed translators learning a new language, one that had nothing to do with scent and everything to do with being seen. We found the truth in fragments, like glass catching light where the hall collapsed. Tom had bartered a dead phone into a live one by convincing a service closet to surrender an emergency radio. Eli, with the blunt competence of someone who'd survived adults, scanned channels until voices stumbled into our ruin, men talking too casually for a disaster, codes we both recognized. A time, a place, the old cliffside villa below the hotel, once a private retreat, now a half-gutted maze the mountain was in the process of taking back. Victor's voice threaded through the static like a knife wrapped in velvet. "Confirm the window," he said. "We clean what the blast missed." Hail first. My hand found the wall. The villa had tunnels, service corridors carved into rock, a smug architectural trick for rich men to move unseen. I looked at Asher. Every line of him was a taut wire. "He sold us peace to buy himself a war," I said. Asher's mouth was a straight, bloodless line. "No. He sold you a stage so he could kill me on it." Eli glanced between us, eyes like polished flint. "Do we run?" "We don't run," Asher said. Too calm. "We end it." I knew that voice. Under the control was the place rage goes to sharpen itself. He stood, and the small quiet we'd built overnight shivered. Tom swallowed a protest. Eli already had her pack on. We took the goat path down to the villa, the sky preloading rain. Thunder rehearsed in the distance. The old house hunched on its shelf of cliff, windows blown, vines threading stone like the mountain reclaiming its deposit. The scentless air pressed damp against my skin. The breeze carried not-so-distant sirens and the heartbeat of bad decisions. The tunnel mouth yawned where a retaining wall had cracked, a concrete grin. I went first, because some instincts hadn't died with my sense of smell. The corridor inside was narrow, low-ceilinged, ribbed with conduit. Water dripped its own metronome. Our flashlights made cones that looked too fragile to deserve the word light. "Left," I whispered, memory dredging up a layout from a briefing yesterday that had felt irrelevant then straight. The utility hubs ahead. We moved in a chain. Me, Asher, Eli, Tom. The corridor turned, narrowed, turned again. The old villa overhead creaked in weather talk. My shoulder brushed cold concrete. Something scuttled away from my boot. At the hub, a junction box big as a refrigerator, I stopped and pointed. "Camera feed. If he's using the tunnels, he's logging somewhere." Tom dropped to a crouch, hands already on the panel with the entitlement of youth and curiosity. "Give me a minute." "You have 30 seconds, Asher said. The patience in it was brittle. The panel fought. Tom swore softly, with the gusto of a choir boy in a scandal. Then the small monitor blinked and resolved to 4 squares of bad grayscale. One showed a corridor like ours, angled from above. 2 showed rooms we didn't know. The 4th held Victor, clean suit in a dirty house, looking like a man who had never liked the outdoors until he discovered how convenient it was for burying problems. He talked to someone off camera. "You confirm the bodies?" A voice answered, a Red Claw lieutenant who'd bragged yesterday about his winter hunting. "The dome's a mess. Hard to tell." Victor's smile made the monitor's contrast seem mean. "Then check. I prefer certainty." My throat worked. Asher leaned closer to the screen in a way that made my surveillance nerves shriek. Focus, I said. We get him talking. We get him recorded. Tom pointed at a microphone symbol on the panel. Intercom still works. We can ghost him. Eli, I said, watch the corridor. Anyone comes, you say cake, and we pretend to be something more dangerous than we are. She nodded, chin set. Asher's gloved fingers flexed like he was reminding them to be hands and not weapons. I pressed the intercom and pitched my voice into Victor's world. Clean, amused. 2 degrees warmer than contempt. Ancestral claims, I said. Such a pretty bedtime story. Victor startled. The camera caught his face tilt, a dog hearing a frequency no one else does. Quinn? Present, I said. Ink still drying. Funny night. His mouth shaped surprise, then resolve. You should have stayed under the glass. And miss your encore? I said. You choreographed the explosions beautifully. The part where you killed the Hail Alpha in the confusion. Tragic, but efficient. Except he's somewhat inconveniently alive. Asher's breath got quieter. It's a strange skill, learning someone's silence. Victor moved closer to the camera. The arrogance of a man who believes institutions belong to him. Do you think you've done something noble, mediator? Kept a monster breathing? Careful, I said. Your metaphor is showing. He chuckled. You talk well. But this is a numbers problem. The Red Claws consolidate under one rule. The Halens lose their spine. The treaty fails. I inherit both roots. And the bodies? They stop arguing, he said. Peace by subtraction, Tom hissed. The intercom light stayed steady. We had the confession. It wasn't elegant, but it didn't need to be. It needed to survive a courtroom and a news cycle. Eli's voice from the corridor, cake, low and urgent. Footsteps. A group, not practiced. The stray rhythm of men who think walking loudly is a strategy. I killed the mic, nodded down the side passage. We moved, sliding in shadow until the tunnel opened into a storage room where old furniture had come to die. We crouched behind a moth-eaten sofa that looked like it remembered when cigarettes were called glamorous. The men passed, 3 red claws in field jackets that still had creases. Their leader's scent, rage, was a phantom I knew only because Asher flinched like the air pushed him. He was shaking. Not fear, pressure, too much feeling in too small a space. We end it, he whispered, and the whisper had teeth. He rose a fraction. I caught his wrist. If you act on instinct, I said, words ironed flat, you'll become the thing you hate. We were suddenly too close, breath hot in the cold tunnel. He looked at me like he was measuring the strength of my bones against his resolve. The machine noise of electricity buzzed in the walls. Water ticked. Thunder rolled above like the sky clearing its throat. Let me, he said, low. Let me be what they think I am for 5 minutes. 5 minutes lasts, I said. It leaves bones. His jaw flexed. A storm contained. For a second, the tunnel shrank to the space between us. Our breaths sawed the dark, out of time. I held his wrist, felt the pulse under skin, fast, furious, human. Breathe with me, I said. Don't give him what he wrote for you. He didn't move. He just stared. And then, like a switch flipping, something in his gaze widened, softened, focused. His nostrils flared. Jeremy, he said, my name breaking on a note I'd never heard from him. He inhaled again, tentative, as if listening at a door. What is that? What is what? You, he said. It's... He swallowed, eyes wet without shame. Rain. The first one after summer. And the ground... His voice thinned. Earth that remembers being dry and then forgives it. My throat hurt. For a stupid second I wanted to turn, to check if a storm had crept inside me. I had not smelled anything in so long, that I'd stopped believing I could be smelled as anything but a blank. Not pheromones, he whispered, wonder cracking him open. You're feeling. The passage over our heads sang with thunder. The first drops began, tentative, like the sky practicing tenderness. Down here the air stayed cool and close, but I held very still because any movement felt like it might spook whatever miracle had decided to roost between us. Okay, I said softly, because humor would snap if I used it. If I smell like weather, aim for light drizzle and not biblical. He laughed then, quiet, grateful, a sound that washed something out of the tunnel. The shake in his hands eased. The rage didn't vanish, but it had to move aside to make room for astonishment. Footsteps again. Closer. Work to do. We took the corridor that paralleled the one the Red Claws had used, came out behind a welded door whose hinges had retired from ambition. Another camera. Another junction box. Tom, saint of stubborn machines, coaxed it into compliance as if praise were a currency it understood. When Victor and his men reached the central chamber, we were already in the gallery above, in shadow. The intercom was ready. The recorder was rolling. Eli watched the back stairs with a focus that could cut rope. I hit the mic. You could still stop, I said. Walk out. Choose a smaller crown. He sneered up at the ceiling, knowing we were somewhere he couldn't scent. Men like me aren't offered choices by men like you. Then try women, Eli said dryly into her own mic, and I loved her for the steal. It went fast then. Asher speaking just enough to keep Victor monologuing. Into his own grave, Tom feeding data to my phone, routing the stream to every law enforcement channel on the mountain. Me keeping my voice level, collecting lines that would hang him in daylight. When Victor ordered his men to finish the job with enough specificity to make even his lawyer resign, sirens converged like a judgment. The Red Claws looked at one another, with the dawning horror of men realizing they'd been standing in a confession the whole time. Two bolted for a side door and met a wall of uniforms and Halens with expressions that had run out of patience. Victor lifted his gun like punctuation. He pointed it at the ceiling, as if he could shoot the weather, and shouted something about honor that sounded small. Asher stood, and for a heartbeat, I feared he'd jump. He didn't. He simply let his presence roll down into the chamber like a front. Look at what you made, he said. Quiet, terrible. It will not be yours. Victor turned that sneer toward us. Toward me. You think this changes anything? It changes you, I said. From problem to exhibit. Rain found the broken windows then. A hard silver. The tunnel took the sound and made it a hymn. Boots pounded up the stairs behind us. Officers, not ours, thank God. A hand on my shoulder, a nod, we were done. Back in the storage room, I checked Tom and Eli with the efficiency of someone who had learned triage the long way. Tom shook with adrenaline and delight. Eli's hands didn't tremble until she realized we were safe enough for them to. Asher leaned on the wall, head tipped back, eyes closed. I went to him, without deciding to. You stayed, I said. I didn't, he said, opening his eyes. You held me. Outside, the storm gave the mountain the bath it needed. Inside, the villa's old bones creaked, resigned to survival. Sirens moved from threat to comfort. The quiet I carried unfolded. He breathed it in, and somewhere in it, for the first time, he found me. 3 weeks is enough time for a city to forget a scandal and decide it never liked smoke indoors anyway. It's enough for a neutral hotel to erect scaffolding and apologize with vouchers. It's enough for wolves to decide that, for now, is a good neighborhood to live in. It was enough for me to go back to work. My new office was glass on 3 sides and opinions on the 4th. From the 22nd floor, the city looked curated. River like a medal, ribbon, bridges practicing posture, morning sun doing PR for clouds. On the wall opposite the windows hung a whiteboard that believed in timelines and checklists. My desk remained a species of organized chaos. The plant in the corner was a fern that didn't know it was doomed. Tom had taken possession of the left side of the room, the way a sunrise takes possession of a kitchen. He was halfway through turning the intern desk into a cockpit. Screens, sticky notes, a mug that declared him world's okayest wolf. He hummed when he concentrated, and narrated to himself when he didn't. Okay, he said now, dragging a window from one screen to another like he was moving continents. If we route the patrol updates through your mediation calendar, the alerts will tie into the treaty checkpoints. No more, oops, we accidentally crossed the border. Oops, I said, deadpan. That's the technical term, he said solemnly. Eli sat on the low couch by the window as if it were a vantage point, not furniture. She had a legal pad, a pen you could stab a problem with, and an expression I came to think of as her useful skepticism. She underlined something with surgical neatness. You're both late for being early, I said. We were on time, she said. You were earlier. Let the record show that punctuality is still legal, Tom chimed. They'd insisted on learning, and I'd insisted they not do it alone. Now my mornings began with their voices, and the office smelled, so they told me, like coffee and rain because September had decided to be cinematic. Our door's frosted glass bore a new vinyl decal, Quinn Mediation, maps, not minefields. Tom had made it. Eli pretended to find it embarrassing. I didn't. The city moved under us, predictable in all the ways that make it lovable. Treaty. There were skirmishes, posturing, a few carefully curated outrages, but the spine of the peace ran from ridge to river and didn't wobble when men raised their voices just to hear them. Okay, Tom said, swiveled to face me, and steepled his fingers like he was auditioning for benevolent mastermind. Teach us something impossible. Impossible is for Thursdays, I said. Today we're doing boundary clauses. Eli, give me a hypothetical. She didn't look up from her notes. A Red Claw patrol comes within 200 meters of the Halen sawmill on a technicality they invented yesterday. Good, I said. What's our first move? Ask questions that make them confess the technicality is a lie, she said. Tom added, while we route the maps to their mothers. Correct, I said. Bonus points for creative shame. Eli's mouth almost smiled. Tom's did a victory lap. We went on like that for an hour. Hypotheticals, responses, the art of choosing a smaller hill to die on. They asked the questions I would have asked at their age, if I'd had the nerve. They also asked the ones I wouldn't have known existed. It felt, in the small working way, like the future being good at its job. Rain began as a rumor on the windows, a soft percussion. The light warmed from white to honey. I told them the story of a treaty that failed because someone insisted on victory in a preposition. Eli wrote prepositions matter and underlined it twice. Tom wrote no prepositions after midnight and underlined it 3 times, then grinned at me like an accomplice. The elevator bell dinged. The outer door opened on a draft that made the fern reconsider its life choices. I didn't turn at first. The rhythm of a morning like this shouldn't be interrupted by ghosts, but the air carried something even I could feel if I tried. Change, like a page turning. Tom sat up straight, eyes bright. Eli's pen stopped. They looked at me, then past me, then back at me as if waiting for a cue. A reflection in the glass, a shape in the door's blur resolving itself into shoulders I knew, and a way of standing that made rooms remember their manners. He wore rain like it belonged to him. In his hands, 2 paper cups with sleeves. On his mouth, the ghost of a smile that looked like it had traveled a long way to see if it could stay. Asher, Tom said, reverent, then ruined it by adding, we have mugs, but those cups are fine. Eli's eyebrows lifted, with the kind of approval she gave to clean fieldwork. You found us without calling, she said, which was Eli for welcome back. Asher stepped in fully, closed the door behind him, and the office decided to be a little quieter. The smell, according to Tom's delighted commentary, was coffee and fresh rain and, according to Eli's correction, coffee, rain, and something like cold, clean stone. To me, it was temperature and a feeling. Pressure that wasn't a threat, a stillness that wasn't empty. He held out a cup. "For your plant," he said, and then, when my face betrayed me, added, "I'm kidding." I took the other one. "You still make plant jokes, I see. You still don't have plants that survive jokes," he said, glancing at the fern with compassion. He looked, not lighter, not exactly, but recalibrated. The scarf wasn't necessary now. The gloves were in his pocket, like options he didn't need today. The eyes were the same dark green, but the edges were less raw. He crossed the room as if the distance between us was a formality he'd stopped respecting. "You still make me breathe easier," he said. "Simple as weather. And you still talk too much," I said, because it was what we did when the alternative was too big to say first. Tom made an operatic gasp. Eli coughed into her legal pad to disguise a smile that would have embarrassed her. Outside, the rain wrote its own agenda on the glass. Asher turned, taking in the decals, the screens, the joke mug, the two teenagers, trying to decide whether to evaporate or become part of this conversation forever. "You brought backup," he said. "They brought themselves," I said. "I just refused to let them do it alone." Eli stood, formal despite the couch. "We've been studying your public record," she said, catching the words before they became flattery. "Your testimony was effective." He inclined his head like she'd given him a medal, and he intended to put it on the quiet shelf. Tom, incapable of not being Tom, started to ask about the tunnels, the acoustics, weather different. Emotions came in chords, then stopped, looked at me, and edited himself into, "Do you need anything?" "Coffee," Asher said, "and this." He gestured, unable to label it without making it smaller. The office, the rain, the three of us breathing the same small weather. "Stay," I said. And it wasn't a question. We pretended to work for another half hour, which mostly meant Tom giving Asher a tour of software, Eli summarizing a case that had almost gone loud and didn't, and me answering emails with the economy of a man who would rather be busy than boastful. The sound in the room rearranged itself around Asher without feeling obligated to. He stood by the window, watched the river try to convince the city it was in charge, and didn't flinch when phones buzzed or when Tom's chair squeaked like a bird with opinions. When the kids left for class, Tom with 3 different reminders for me, Eli with one for herself. We were alone with the afternoon trying to decide if it wanted to be bright. He stayed by the glass, reflection superimposed on skyline, like a truth you could almost touch. "So," I said, stepping beside him, shoulder to shoulder, "how does peace smell?" He considered. The rain had settled into a rhythm. A taxi below threw up a blossom of spray. He turned his face a fraction, close enough that I could count the sleep lines mornings leave when you earn them. "Like coffee," he said at last, "and like you, when you smile." My mouth did what it was told. It wasn't a big smile. If anything, it felt like the first page of one. In the glass, we were a pair of men in a tall office, pretending to be ordinary. That was the joke and the miracle. He reached for my hand without needing to test the air first. I let my fingers close around his, and if there was a scent to that, I didn't have the language for it. I didn't need one. He leaned his shoulder against mine. A weight you only notice because it's the right amount. We watched the rain spend itself. Someone on the street below argued with someone else, then gave up and shared an umbrella. Far upriver, a barge bullied the current into acquiescence. The plant in the corner reconsidered dying. "I kept a list," I said, surprising myself. Things I thought I'd miss forever. Coffee, wet pavement, my father's aftershave, my mother's kitchen, summer storms. Every time the list got shorter, I wrote smaller, like it would hurt less. He didn't look away from the window. "And now?" "The list changed," I said. "It's not smells anymore, it's moments. The way you laugh when you're not bracing. Tom's running commentary on the weather. Eli pretending not to care about stickers. The sound of paper when a treaty holds. The way my office feels when you walk into it like you always meant to. He was quiet for a long breath. I can work with that, he said. I believed him. We stood there until the rain turned into residue, and the city remembered it had appointments. He told me about the committee that had grown teeth, about the Red Claws cutting their own arrogance down to size, to survive the news cycle, about a morning where he walked through a crowded market and only had to leave once. I told him about a mediation that almost fell apart over a comma, about Tom learning to lie only in the direction of safety, about Eli discovering that being careful and being brave are cousins, not enemies. The clouds parted like a curtain indulging an encore. Sun found the river and polished it a little. The office warmed by degrees. I finished my coffee, which tasted like memory for other people. Asher finished his, which tasted like the thing it was. He set the empty cup on the sill. Stay for dinner, I said, and then, because he would overthink that verb if I let him, added, we're ordering dumplings. It's an advanced exercise in diplomacy. You had me at dumplings, he said. Liar. He smiled. A little. We left the window. The room kept the shape we'd made in it. The city went on doing its noisy, ordinary miracles. My phone pinged with a reminder about a clause that would keep a checkpoint from becoming a provocation. I hit snooze, not because it wasn't important, but because for once I was allowed to choose the next breath over the next item. Asher squeezed my hand once and let go, not because he needed to, but because he knew we didn't have to prove anything by holding on in performative ways. He turned toward the desk as if he belonged to it, and in that unremarkable motion was the thing I hadn't known I was waiting for. I watched the light on the floor shift half a tone and realized the word I'd been chasing wasn't silence after all. It was this. Room enough to be exactly ourselves without asking permission from old instincts. I lost my sense of smell, but found something infinitely rarer. Peace.